Good afternoon. This is Briefing with the Chief. I'm your host, Patrick Jordan. You're on KJDB.com. Latest KJ Radio. You can catch us every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KJ's Rumble channel, their Facebook page, and their Twitter feed. And now, in the last few weeks, on YouTube. So you can just go to YouTube, and I think you subscribe over there on YouTube on their KJDB channel. And you can start watching my shows on YouTube. If some people just haven't migrated over to Rumble, they won't do it. And YouTube is still the most popular place for videos. So I appreciated KJDB putting my show on YouTube, and just reward them by going over there and subscribing to their channel and following my show and liking my show and sharing it with a friend. But you can also, if you want to catch older versions of my show, you can go to KJDB.com. Briefing with the Chief. Just go to the KJDB.com website, go to Briefing with the Chief. You'll find it under the Shows and Host tab. And you can find all the audio versions of my show. And I got some really great shows in the can, as they say in Hollywood. What that meant, I got to explain that because I don't think I've explained that. So in Hollywood, they used to make movies with film, right? And once it was all done, it would go in the can, right, for editing. So it's in the can. That's where that saying came from. So now you learned a little bit about Hollywood. I'm not born and raised in Hollywood, but I've lived here for 40 plus years. So you pick up a little bit of the lingo here. But today's show, I'm going to go over the Michael Bolton indictment. It's one of the things that has bothered me about Bolton's indictment, the mishandling or the alleged mishandling of intelligence documents by Trump, even at Mar-a-Lago, by Biden, putting material in his garage next to his Corvette, the fact that Pence had some material, Hillary Clinton's private server in which she put sensitive material over a private server for whatever her reasons are. And hopefully we'll get a chance to get into why she did what she did. But what bothers me is the cavalier attitude that people in the most senior levels of our government take with sensitive materials. Sensitive materials. I had a security clearance for a while. When I was the chief of the LA Metro, I went into what I call a SCIF, and we'll get into that hopefully in the show, where you can share information and it's not going to leak out, and only certain people can hear it. You can't take any listening devices in. You can just take some notes, but even then, you got to be careful what notes you take. And so you're under all these obligations when you get a security clearance, and certainly his was a top security clearance, nothing like mine. Mine was just a garden variety one, and then they can share intelligence with you. And then for me, it gave me an idea of how I could deal with protecting critical infrastructure in Los Angeles, because I was the chief of the LA Metro, that's transportation system. But I also partnered with freight rail and trucking, and we coordinated with LAX, so the airports in the area and the ports in the area, which are all really big, important national infrastructures. 40%, and most people don't know it, but 40% of the imports that come to the United States come through the LA and Long Beach ports. A very important piece of critical infrastructure. So, intelligence is very important, and keeping intelligence secure is very important, which is why I think going over the indictment of John Bolton is very important. And it's not really a Republican or Democratic issue. That's how it's getting characterized. Trump's going after his political enemies. But when you read the indictment, you understand that John Bolton, who should have known better, didn't live up to expectations, and now he's being prosecuted for it. And we'll get into his criticism of others, including Trump, and yet he did exactly the same thing. But before we do that, I want to talk about what's going on in Portland. Now, I think we got a video. Let's roll with the video, and then I'll explain why it's important.
A long-running encampment outside of an immigration customs and enforcement facility in Portland has been taken down by police. And a man was arrested after a journalist was assaulted near the facility. NTD correspondent Jason Blair is in Portland now. Good evening, Jason. What is the current situation after the encampment got taken down?
Hey, Tiffany. Yeah, so this has been a long-running encampment in some form or another for about 4 or 5 months now, right across the street from the ICE facility in Portland, Oregon. And the police did come by last night to make them take it down. And here I do have a clip, actually, of what the current state of the encampment is. Just moments ago, when I took it. You can see that there's a small canopy back up already, and a lot of the stuff is still strung out on the sidewalk. However, I do have footage of it from last night. As you can see, when they were taking it down, when the police arrived, there were a lot of tents up, and like I said, this had been going on for about 4 or 5 months. And the main reason the police wanted to take it down is they need to keep the sidewalk open so people can use it. And a police sergeant said last night that they are going to be coming into the area more often to get more strict with enforcing laws in this area for, quote, the next couple of days. And this includes cracking down on public drinking, disorderly conduct, and jaywalking. And he said if someone is blocking traffic, that it will be disorderly conduct in the second degree, and someone can actually go to jail for that, which blocking traffic has been an ongoing issue with the facility. Cars are constantly driving in and people are spilling over in the sidewalk, and I think this encampment was contributing to that quite a bit. The encampment was also kind of a source of lots of fights. Sometimes people, especially when some of the pro-ICE supporters would try to walk through that area, there would often be a confrontation leading to sometimes a physical altercation with injuries. Back to you.
And Jason, I understand that an arrest was made after a journalist was assaulted. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Tiffany, unfortunately, this kind of thing is not too uncommon. A journalist named Cam Higbee said that he was assaulted, and also his phone was stolen and smashed while he was filming in the area. He's often at the ICE facility filming and reporting on the situation. He says that he regularly gets death threats when he's out doing this, and this isn't the first time that he's been attacked, but a gentleman was arrested related to this assault, and he was taken into custody by the Portland police. And just to give you another example of kind of the things that have happened here, another journalist said that just the other day she was eating in a restaurant with some of her friends, and one of the protesters regularly at the ICE facility recognized them and started live streaming them sat next to them at the table, started live streaming their private conversation. Eventually, this person was asked to leave the hotel. But this is just some of the interesting things that have gone on in the area involving journalists. Back to you.
All right, Jason, thanks for that, and stay safe out there.
Well, I appreciate the report from the news guys there, but some of the protesters, that's Antifa. That's Antifa. That the gentleman who was arrested, that's Antifa. Antifa assaulted news reporter, the journalist. That is a typical tactic of Antifa, is they assault journalists. So they call themselves anti-fascists, but they assault journalists. Because here's what they don't want. They don't want the truth to get out. So by assaulting journalists, whether they're non-aligned journalists, meaning just mainstream journalists, or aligned conservative, whatever they are, or they're just trying to build up their YouTube page as they report news, they get assaulted by Antifa because Antifa wishes to present a certain picture, and these politicians go along with it, right? Well, they're just anti-fascists. No, they're not. They're anarchists. In fact, I saw a news report today, and they talked about what was going on in Portland, and instead of saying it was Antifa who did it, they said anarchists. Because here's the deal: they don't want they don't want to tie protesters to Antifa and say that they're one and the same, right? They don't want to do that. What they want to talk about is legitimate protests. They don't want to characterize them as Antifa, because Antifa now, even though they changed their name from anarchist to Antifa to make themselves a little more palatable, it's becoming unpalatable to associate yourself with Antifa. But I want to talk about what is going on in Portland. If you remember what went on in Los Angeles when ICE started doing their raids there, right? Is all these people came out and started protesting and assaulting ICE. And our political leaders started talking about how we had to resist, how we had to suppress them, and Trump sent in the National Guard. Then our political leaders were wringing their hands. You're militarizing our city. This is, and I made some comments, not only on my show, but other shows. I said, as soon as Trump sends in the National Guard, and they keep saying they're not needed, we got it, it's under control, but journalists are out there showing the violence, the local leaders will be forced to do something. Because even though the city of LA tried to characterize it as just happening in a very small, dense area near the federal enclave. When I say the federal enclave, I mean the federal courthouse and the ICE facilities and whatnot in downtown LA. There was still some communities that were in those areas that were impacted those protests as well. But they're trying to say it's no big deal. We've got to contain, we got to control. But the media would go down there and see the violence every single night. It was shown ad nauseum on TV as they assaulted local police, including the CHP. And so when Mayor Bass and Gavin Newsom says the National Guard isn't needed, we don't need it here, and yet you see the violence every single night on TV, when they say we have it under control, we can handle it, we have sufficient resources, we don't need the National Guard, and went to court and sued and did everything they did, they lost credibility because the violence still continued and the media was showing it. YouTubers were showing it. It was fairly obvious the level of violence that was occurring. So as the chief of the LAPD said, yeah, it's getting out of hand. It's getting out of, even he couldn't lie. He wouldn't lie because that isn't him. That is not Jim McDonald. I may not have been always a fan of everything he does, but I do believe Jim McDonald is an honest guy, and he was trying to tell the truth the best he could. He says it's getting out of hand. And you know what? Then he and the Sheriff's Department and the CHP, the LAPD, the Sheriff's Department, CHP were allowed to do their jobs and clear out the protesters, meaning the rioters, the violent protesters, the Antifa folks, and they were able to take some of those folks to jail. And Nathan Hochman, the DA here, was able to prosecute them. Bill Asaley, the acting U.S. attorney, he was able to prosecute some of those folks. But it quieted down. And why do you think it quieted down? Because it didn't serve LA very well. It didn't serve the leaders here very well, particularly in the shadow of the Palisades fire and the Eaton Canyon fire, where the credibility and the confidence of local leaders was at an all-time low, right? They couldn't keep saying, well, there's no violence, it's not a problem, it's shown on the news, we got it under control, when it clearly wasn't under control. And the thing about it, what Trump did was fantastic, because he sent the troops in anyways, and they were forced to do their job. They were forced to stem the violence. I'm confident, because this was all a network of leftist organizations, that they told them, knock it off. And they knocked it off. But Portland kicked off around that time as well. And so did Cook County, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, where they have a detention facility. They have these protests going. And Governor Pritzker in Illinois, and the governor in Portland, and the mayor in Portland, and the mayor in Chicago, they continued to feed the fire. They continue to say, we have to resist ICE, we have to protect our community, we have to do all these things, even as violence around these ICE facilities was getting out of control. They denied the violence, they denied that Antifa existed, they denied all of this stuff, and Trump just said, well, I'm going to send in the National Guard. And what happened? Let me talk about what is actually going on here, okay? So under the Biden administration, they flooded many of the blue states with a lot of migrants. And they did that for a reason. They're doing it because they wanted them here for the 2030 census. A lot of people are leaving blue states because of the policies. I've talked about it before on my show. We've seen a flood of people leaving California, particularly middle-class people, families that are making $200,000 a year. Claremont McKenna, the university, has done a study on this. I listened to a professor talk about this. He said they're leaving in droves, and they're not getting replaced. What that means is California was looking at losing 3 House seats, but also 3 electoral seats. So they count on California to be their base in presidential elections, because I think it's 53 or 54 electoral votes. Well, they're slated to lose 3 or 4. That's big, because many of our elections are decided by just a handful of electoral votes. The same thing is happening in Illinois. Same thing is happening in New York and many of our other major cities. So you saw the Democratic Party flood those states with migrants for a reason, in preparation for that census. And then they passed sanctuary city or sanctuary state policies where nobody could work with ICE, right? Nobody could work with ICE. So then Trump is elected. He decides he overturns all of Biden's stuff. He shuts down the border. He gets rid of all the crazy nonsense that Biden was doing. And then he starts targeting criminal aliens. Now, in the past, many of these sanctuary states, Illinois, California, Massachusetts, New York State, they all worked with Obama when it was politically expedient for the Democratic Party to deport people. Obama deported 2.7 million people using the very same laws that Trump is trying to use. And these states, Illinois, California, New York, Massachusetts, all worked with the Obama administration to do those deportations, because they were all run by Democrats. and the Democrats were all supporting the national Democrats, and it was within their political it was politically expedient for them to support those policies, so they supported Obama and they deported people. Now, the strategy was obviously to flood these states, and by passing the sanctuary city or sanctuary state laws, that prevented any administration after that from doing anything, right? So this is their game plan. So now Trump comes in and he wants to enforce the laws, the very same laws that Obama enforced, that even to some degree Biden supported or enforced, Clinton enforced. These states won't allow the federal government in, or they won't even work with the federal government to deport anybody, because it's in their best interest to have migrants in their states, because when they do the census, it counts everybody in the state, not just voters, not just citizens, everybody in the state. So if you flooded your state with 5 million migrants, like they're saying in California, then you get clout because of that. And here's the thing about it. Think about it from an equal protection situation, right? For other states. Let's say you're Iowa, smaller state, not as many people, and California and the Democrats and your Republican and California and the Democratic Party floods all these blue states with people so that they can get more electoral votes. Think about that. So you as a voter and a resident in Iowa, or pick another state, Montana, your vote is diluted by this corrupt scheme that they got going on. You don't get the same weight and vote. A voter in California, because you got 5 million illegals, gets more weight in what is going on in Washington, D.C. with their vote than you do, because they flooded their state with illegal migrants, and they protected and prevented ICE from removing them. So this is politically expedient for them to do this. So, and of course, then they follow up. California, even Massachusetts, New York, Portland, or Oregon, and Illinois, we got to resist ICE, right? And you see that happening. In LA, they figured out it wasn't politically expedient for them, and they knocked it off, and the troops left. Portland, for 5 months, was creating havoc and violence outside of an ICE facility in their city. The leaders were supporting it. They were documenting everything ICE did, because, of course, they're going to sue them. And then Trump says, well, I'm going to send in the National Guard. And they've been resisting them, and Trump's been winning, and eventually the National Guard was going to come. And just a few days ago, I think, let's roll with the clip. I think Portland cleaned it up. Wait, just do that clip. Okay. So Portland cleaned it up. But why did they clean it up? They cleaned it up because they didn't want the National Guard there. Here's the one thing that I want everybody to understand. So they have called ICE and federal officers, because it isn't just ICE. It's the FBI helping. It's the it's the federal marshals helping. Federal marshals just got in a shooting the other day, taking a violent migrant into custody. They're all helping. So it isn't just ICE that are Gestapos and Nazis. It's all these federal officers. And here's what doesn't work. What doesn't work is the 19-year-old kid who's in the National Guard, who's been deployed to protect an ICE building, being called the Nazi and Gestapo by some thugs who went to college, got their degree, and are marching around pretending to be social justice warriors. And this 19-year-old kid who couldn't afford to go to college right away joined the National Guard to hope to get the VI bill. So are you going to start calling him a Nazi and a Gestapo because he's following orders? That's exactly what these people don't want. Because think about it. Who's in the National Guard? Right? Just the average Joes. Getting another check in, maybe getting some military benefits, but so they can go back to college. I mean, look what J.D. Vance did. He went in the Marines for 4 years so he can have his college paid for. That's who goes into the military. And what would it look like to have all those young men and women who go in the military to support their community, have a bunch of rich, bunch of middle class thugs who went to college on mom and dad's dime, or took out some loans and refused to pay them back, called themselves Antifa, running around calling them Nazis and Gestapo. How would that look? Well, it would look pretty bad. I really think that's why Portland's backing off, because they haven't backed off in over 2 years when it comes to Antifa. They haven't taken aggressive, and finally they disbanded and took down all of their encampments. So I think that's finally, I think Trump's doing exactly what he needs to do with that. He needs to just keep rolling the dice with these guys and forcing them to take really bad positions politically, because that is a bad position. How does that look on TV if you got a bunch of college-educated knuckleheads marching around calling a bunch of people in uniform, young men and women in uniform, who are just serving their countries nasty names. Well, that wouldn't look very good, right? How many more people will leave the Democratic Party when you see that? A lot more. So, anyways, good job to Trump. I think he's winning that PR battle, and I think the polls show it. And I think he just needs to keep doubling down and forcing those guys to do stupid things, which is exactly what they're doing. So, good job. Portland PD finally stepped up and cleared it out. I haven't liked what I've seen out of Portland PD, but they did clear it out. They did what they had to do, and it seems like the Portland leaguers they want to stay in charge, so they got to figure out, well, how do we oppose Trump without looking like knuckleheads? That's going to be hard for them to do because they just, like I said, they just keep doubling down on stupid. I think Trump got one over on them, and so good for Trump by threatening to set in the National Guard. But now we want to get into John Bolton. He was indicted. Now he's a former national security advisor. Let's roll with the first video in this series.
We have breaking news right here on CNN from our Caitlin Polans, who has been reporting on the possible indictment of John Bolton, the former national security advisor for President Trump in his first term. Caitlin, what do we know?
Casey, John Bolton, the former national security advisor to Donald Trump, a longtime federal government official, has been indicted by a grand jury. We are learning that through two different sources from our producer, Hannah Rabinowitz at the Justice Department. And we have confirmed that the grand jury was in today with the lead prosecutor on that case, the same prosecutor who had been on some of the documents of the search of Bolton's house just 2 months ago, or not even 2 months ago, a prosecutor who also has some experience in investigating these sorts of things. He was a prosecutor that was also working on the Biden classified documents handling investigation that led to no charges. But in this situation, the bulk of this case, it's been going on for several years, and our understanding is that it's about John Bolton's use of an email account with AOL, an email account where he was writing diary-like notes and summaries of his time as national security advisor to himself, at times even sending them to his wife and daughter. And that is the sort of thing that the Justice Department does say frequently, not just in the climate of a Trump administration, that that's something that you should not do. We have seen many charges like this before of other high-ranking officials, and that also with John Bolton in those search warrants, and what we're very likely to see in court going forward is that the Justice Department saying he should have known better. Casey?
Caitlin, can you take us through here the timeline of investigations into John Bolton and just what we know and don't know?
Yeah, it's perplexing to me that John Bolton, the former national security advisor, former ambassador to the United Nations, would do what he's alleged to have done, but he did it. And it's also perplexing to me is why these folks who have these security clearances, who sign these non-disclosure agreements, who engage, who said that they raised their hand and said they're going to do all the right things to get their securities. Because I had a securities clearance, I had to commit to certain behaviors and actions, and not leak information. Now I wasn't. Most of the stuff I got was sensitive information. It wasn't top secret. But they're dealing with the most important secrets that our nation has on a day-to-day basis. So let me explain what a national security advisor is, because I think some of this is decoding it for the public. What does this mean? I don't know. So the national security advisor assists the president in managing the National Security Council. So the National Security Council has many people on it. I'll get in that in a minute. And the National Security Council has available to it all of the latest up-to-date intel, where it came from, sources and methods that is used to gather it, to make decisions. So it includes integrated intelligence that is integrated from the domestic, foreign, and military, policies related to the national security of the United States. So he helps to devise the policy for the president. He helps to shape that for the president, consistent with the direction of the president. So the president, he's going to give his broad direction. This is where I want to go. Here are the things. So if you look at the Trump administration, he wanted to play hardball with Hamas, right? So his national security advisors are going to come up with a strategy where they meet our national interests, while at the same time they're crafting a path forward to bring peace in the area, right? So they got to work with the Israelis, they got to work with Hamas, they got to work with other people in the area, and they use intelligence to try and figure out where these folks really are at. Because publicly, people will say one thing, but behind closed doors, there might be other interests going on. That's where the intelligence comes in, and you have challenges as you gather it, because nobody wants you to know their secrets, and you need to know their secrets so you can get advantage, right? That's what this is all about, right? And so, and then having somebody who can help craft a direction forward based upon the president's policy as a national security advisor, as he brings the National Security Council together, is a very key figure, and it becomes a very powerful figure. And this was started in the 1940s. I think it was 1947. So the people that are on the National Security Council, the members of the National Security Council, are generally, they include the president, obviously the vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, the secretary of energy, and secretary of treasury, and the directorate of the Office of Pandemic Preparedness and Response Policy, and then anybody else that deems necessary. Now, the latest guy, the pandemic guy, that seems like probably a new addition. But if you think about it, depending on what the intel comes in, you may have to bring in other secretaries from the cabinet, depending on what is going on, just so that they can hear the intelligence and give you. Let's say they're going to threaten transportation, for example. Let's say they're going to threaten transit. So you might bring in Secretary Duffy into the National Security Council for a limited basis, give him the intel, and then maybe get some strategies or some his thoughts on how he might want to protect our critical infrastructure like transportation, whether it's freight rail, trucking, buses, whatever it is, airports, ports, because all of that is in his lane, right? And so you might bring in somebody in the National Security Council, but it would be John Bolton's job to manage all those folks and help come out with a coherent policy. And given his long time in government and his long time in dealing with national security issues, he's going to bring that historical knowledge that is sometimes very important for a incoming president or a president who may not have, they don't have that long institutional knowledge like, say, Trump does, because he's not a politician per se. He's not Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State. You know, he's not Biden, who's been in government and been getting intel briefs for decades. And so you have somebody that's got the historical knowledge. Theoretically, would be somebody that the president trusted, although I don't think Trump really trusted Bolton very much, and there was no love lost between these two guys. The National Security Guard directed and supervises the work of the NSC staff. So you got staff that help support this group. Bolton has access to and is responsible for safeguarding. So he's responsible for safeguarding, not just access to, but he's responsible for safeguarding the most sensitive national defense information, including classified information. So he not only gets it and helps to develop policy based upon it, but he's got an obligation to safeguard it. Due to Bolton's need to have ready access to this data, they did something. They put a sensitive compartmented information facility in his house called a SCIF. Now, I've been in a SCIF before. I've received intelligence briefings in a SCIF. And essentially, it's an area where there are no electronic devices that can listen in. You're not supposed to take any electronic devices that are not part of any government, federal government devices. So they might have like a communication system that the feds have that's encrypted, that is considered safe to talk to the people in the room, but you can't have like your cell phone in there or anything else in that. It just needs to be left at the door. You can maybe take a notepad in, that's about it. And so they had it at his house so that he can conduct business at his house. Now none of this sounds unusual to me, but what it does when you do that, you also sign, I recognize the importance of the SCIF and not to violate the SCIF, not to bring people in who shouldn't be there, not to have listening devices, all these rules that you have, and that you can't leave material in the SCIF, whatever. You can't store stuff there, right? So that was one of the big ones there. So what it is, it's laying out that John Bolton had unprecedented access to the highest level of intelligence, and that he was clearly aware of his obligations to the United States government and safeguarding this. No location within Bolton's house was approved to store any unlawful material. This is important because they did find unlawful material. At no point, including the period where Bolton was had an accredited SCIF in his home, was he authorized to store and transmit any classified documents. So you could only use those systems there. You couldn't use any unauthorized communication system to transport any unlawful documents, including AOL and Google, which he ultimately used. And, so we got to get into the meat of what he actually did to abuse it. And to do that, I think we have to roll a clip. Let's roll with the one where he criticizes Trump, and then I'll talk a little bit, and then we'll deal with cool things.
As we've been reporting, the DOJ unsealed a detailed inventory list of the items seized in the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. CBS News' Catherine Herridge has a new interview with former National Security Advisor John Bolton about the Justice Department's ongoing investigation. Here's a preview.
What are the national security implications of the commingling of these records?
Well, to the extent that the newspaper clippings were treated like most people in this country would treat newspaper clippings, it shows a real disdain for the seriousness of the classification at issue. In most offices, you would have a very clear segregation of the sensitive classified material locked in safes, handled very carefully, versus all the unclassified material. This, to me, is more evidence that Donald Trump didn't give much attention to the sensitivity of the classified information.
You can watch more of Catherine's interview with John Bolton right here on CBS News.
Yeah, think about that. So he is laying out Trump because he's commenting on Mar-a-Lago and what was found there and how the sensitive material was not handled properly, and Donald Trump doesn't take it serious. This guy was a big critic of Donald Trump, and we're going to find out that he's a hypocrite. But when you hear the criticism, of all of Trump's legal problems leading up to the election, this was the one I thought was most important, because his cavalier, if Trump did handle this information in a cavalier way, it would be akin to what Hillary Clinton did, right, with her server. Not quite as bad. It would be akin to Joe Biden having sensitive material in his garage, which remember the special prosecutor Orr said that, yeah, he did violate the law, but we can't prosecute him because he's too old. Remember that whole story? So yeah, Hillary Clinton did violate that law. So did Biden. Sounds like Pence might have violated it. But John Bolton, this is what he does. This is all he does. He deals with intelligence. He analyzes intelligence. He helps draft policy based upon intelligence. This is all he does. And he's criticizing, and he's got one more criticism of Trump. Cool things. Let's show that.
John Bolton, thank you for being with us today. I want you've said in a bunch of places that you think that it's obvious it's not just a lie but a desperate lie. I guess the place I really want to start with you is on the question of how you witnessed Donald Trump deal with classified materials broadly within the White House, and whether he was, as many now say, sort of a walking, talking national security threat at all times.
Well, I don't think he was a threat at all times, because the volume of highly sensitive information that he heard in 4 years is not reflected in what he divulged, I think, inappropriately. So a lot of this was just reflective of the way things happened in the Trump White House, living inside a pinball machine, depended on what he did at any given moment. But I don't think he cared about the classification system. I don't think he appreciated the sensitivity of this information, and he didn't appreciate the sensitivity of how it was often acquired, the so-called sources and methods. So this had been briefed to him before I arrived. It was repeated frequently. I think it simply had no impact on him whatever.
There's a couple of different ways that people think about this, and people who are not friendly to the president, who think about what's happened here. And one of them is, Donald Trump, master thief, criminal, running some kind of elaborate conspiracy to bring things out of the White House and keep them secret, for potentially for political or financial gain. There are other people who his attitude is Trump is chaotic. He's careless. He's not that smart. He took these things almost by mistake, and now he's basically stamping his feet and saying they're mine. I don't want to give them up. Give me a sense of where you think the truth lies with respect to Trump's intelligence, carelessness, and the degree to which he might have brought motive to bear on taking these documents out of the White House and keeping them for this long at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah. So, what he goes on later on in the clip, he goes on as well. Donald Trump was he liked cool things. That's what he said. I cut it a little bit short because I have a lot to talk about, but that's what he said in this document. But in his indictment, in his indictment, once John Bolton became the National Security Advisor in 2018 through 2019, so I think it was, let's see, it was April of 2018 through September of 2019 for Donald Trump in the Trump administration, he started doing this thing called, he started creating diaries. So he would go to a briefing, a skiff, whatever, and he would take detailed notes. He would write those detailed notes down. And this is where the cool things issue. And when I read his indictment and I listened to what he's saying here, what a hypocrite, is he'd go home or he'd go to his office and occasionally he would write a lengthy diary, like 24, one of the longest one was 77 pages of notes that he took, or recollections, and often the notes that he took at these secured briefing, which included very sensitive intelligence, many times collected in methods and from sources we don't want our foreign adversaries to know about. And then he would type it up in a diary and he would send it to two different sources who were not part of the security arrangement. And he did it via AOL and Google. Unsecured, commercial, communication software that everybody has that's easily hacked. And he did it through his own private accounts. That's what he did. And when they don't name who 1 and 2 are, who he sent them to, but it's out in the news reports. It's his wife and his daughter. So he's writing up these diaries to his wife and daughter about his day-to-day stuff. Likely, yeah, I know. My producer says, AOL, is that still around? Yeah, it is still around. That's still a thing. I think people still have their AOL emails and accounts, and they use them, right? And here's yeah. He might still be on MySpace, yeah. Maybe, I bet he probably sent some intelligence information over. But he's writing his diary down based upon his notes, and that's still, just because it's not a formal document, the fact that he's sharing information that is sensitive to our country, and how we get it is very important, right? We don't want people to know how we get it. We don't want them to know our human intelligence source, because then they get murdered, right? Those are things we don't want anybody to know. They don't want to know that we might be getting information from another foreign intelligence service from another country that may be playing both sides. We don't want our adversaries to know that stuff, right? So we don't want the head of our National Security Council, our National Security Advisor, writing this documentation, documenting this all down and sending to his wife and daughter over unsecured. Well, one, they're not even part of the. They shouldn't read it, get it at all. He shouldn't even sit down in front of a fire and tell them what's going on. Hey, let's sit down and talk about what happened at work. He can't do that either. He shouldn't talk about it at all, let alone write it down in a diary and send it to them, which is what he is accused of doing. And it's interesting because he did it on multiple occasions. Let's see. So he continued doing this even after he left the service of the United States government. He continued to write these diaries, and he did it like on multiple occasions. I think one I read was 77 pages, 24 pages, 25 pages, but here's the deal. Here's the deal, and this goes with Hillary's service. I might throw that video in just a minute, but let's talk about this. So let me read it straight from the indictment because it's so important, right? And this is item number 14 in this indictment. At some point between when Bolton left government service in September 19, 2019 to July of 2021, a cyber actor believed to be associated with the Islamic Republic of Iran hacked John Bolton's personal email accounts, which had all of these diaries contained in it. So he wrote all of these diaries to his wife and daughter. I don't know, because they wanted to think he was cool and he was the big man on campus. I don't know why he would do that. Collecting a diary for maybe using a book, memoirs that they could write about Dad, John Bolton, and he got hacked. And now they have access to everything that he wrote while he was National Security Advisor under Trump in these diaries to his wife and daughter, which included very sensitive information, military information. And I'll get into some of them in a minute here if I have time. And this is why you can't do it. This is why you shouldn't do it. This is why we have all the safeguards in place. And if you listen to John Bolton as he talks on these things, oh, we should be, you need to be very serious. And Trump wasn't serious, but neither was he. He wasn't serious at all in how he handled this. Now, he did inform the U.S. government that his personal emails got hacked, but here's something else he didn't do. He didn't tell them about the sensitive information that he shared with others via these accounts. So he said, yeah, I was hacked. My personal emails were hacked. But he didn't say, yeah, and there's a whole host of sensitive stuff that we don't want Iran to know about in my email servers, because that would have tipped, they would have said, hey, I just violate a whole bunch of laws, come and arrest me. So he wasn't upfront. He wasn't honest. So even after he blew it, he didn't do the right thing and come clean like he should have. And that's the problem. And this is also, let's roll with the Hillary Clinton clip, because I want to talk about her before we get to the end of the show.
So we looked at data from 2012 where this couple of anonymous researchers basically scanned hundreds of millions of IP addresses on the internet. And when they did that, they figured out what open doors were available on each server. We went back and looked at that data at the time when Clinton was Secretary of State. And on it, we found services, as they're called, software that was running on it that was configured in such a way that appeared to give it direct access to the internet. And there were services at the time that tech experts say shouldn't be pointing to the internet because it's at risk for hacking. So in other words, her server was configured in such a way to let people get remote access to it using a protocol that very year the US government said contained security holes where hackers could execute malicious code on that server and compromise it. And I think that the question going forward is what is the FBI, which has possession of her server, what are they going to find on it? Was there evidence of true hacking? Was any of her data compromised? What this does is it shows that it's an example of possible poor security setup that Clinton deployed when she was Secretary of State, because if we remember, she chose to have a private server running out of her home in upstate New York rather than use a State Department email account for her BlackBerry and her iPad.
Yeah, so and news reports said that she was likely hacked. Her private server was likely hacked. One of the reasons why she had to wash or scrub her disks or the hard drives. You remember her famous, I don't know how to wash a hard drive. I don't know how to do that. It was because she was communicating sensitive data on her personal server. And, you have to understand, she was going to run for president. And the last thing she wanted was her secrets to be communicated over a government server, which are kept and preserved and could be mined and checked out for corrupt behaviors. So she wanted this on private servers because she didn't want anybody to know what she was doing. Well, what she did is she did communicate sensitive information as the Secretary of State. It's probably one of the most sensitive intelligence positions you could have in the cabinet, the Secretary of State, because she communicates with all these foreign governments. She gets all the intel, just like the military gets all the intel. And now she's communicating on a private server, likely hacked. And we knew this. And John Bolton knew this. And he still did what he did. I mean, we're talking people, some Secretary of State, National Security Advisor. These are important people in our government, and look how cavalier they are with our sensitive intelligence data. And let me lay this out for you. Sources and methods. See, this, we use we use technology as a way to get intel. We use sources, foreign government sources to get intel, but we also use human intelligence. We I don't want to say groom because that's a terrible word now, but we look for and we develop sources, human intelligence sources in other countries, and they get close to their leaders and they give us information. They give us information that we can use to keep Americans safe. And when sources and methods and when information is leaked, foreign governments can go back and look at the information, look at how it was leaked, and try and figure out the sources and methods and whether it was human intelligence that was responsible for that leak, and they can eliminate that human source. That's why it's so dangerous that our leaders, Hillary Clinton, John Bolton, Biden, whoever, even to some degree maybe Trump, are so cavalier about these intelligence sources and them being released. So I wanted to talk about, let's see, so this one, the notes that Bolton sent to individuals, one or two, his wife and daughter, personal email accounts and messaging accounts described in, the indictment. Let's see in detail. Let's see, I had this circled for during the time that he was national security advisor that often Bolton described the secure setting of the environment in which he learned of the information, the national defense and classified information, and it was he know where it came from, what the source was, and he communicated some of this stuff. So I just said sources, intelligence, human intelligence, the threat to human intelligence when this stuff leaks out. He knew this, and yet he documented it in his diaries and sent it to his wife and daughter over unsecured systems. So this, just negligence alone for John Bolton, he's guilty. Even if he had no intent for any of this to leak out, the fact that he handled it in such a negligent manner means that he's guilty. This is why this is important. So ignore the Republican and Democrat thing, because you've heard me. I've been critical on both sides on this issue. And John Bolton is an expert. He should have known, and he did things that were detrimental to our country. He did things that put people at risk, and he did it in what I would call a very cavalier attitude, particularly since he knew about it. Now, he also wrote a book, and I need to talk a little bit about the book, because he wrote a book, and what happens when you're an intelligence guy and you write a book is you then have to submit it to the FBI and others for review to make sure it doesn't have any classified stuff in it. And it did. The first draft did, and they had to remove stuff, and they came to an agreement on what could go in the book and what couldn't be in the book and that kind of stuff. But he communicated some of the information to the editor to get him interested in the book. That also was a problem. Now, here's the problem with these books and these guys, these intelligence guys. He made $1 million off this book. So his access to intelligence, it becomes very valuable because, one, he gets hired on think tanks for 6 figures, and he gets to write a book and makes $1 million off the book. So so he's making his money, and so they can say whatever they want, because remember what the news reporter said, well, was Trump just getting this to use to make money, to sell, and whatever? No, Bolton said, no, I just think he didn't understand the importance of it, or he was really cavalier about it. John Bolton understood the importance of it. John Bolton understood this allowed him to get 6-figure jobs. John Bolton understood that he could get $1 million from a book that he produced. John Bolton made money off using this information, and Trump did not. John Bolton did. Now, John Bolton didn't make that allegation. That was the media. But John Bolton knew what he was doing. And his book, just for yucks, is The Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir of John Bolton working with Donald Trump. Of course, everybody's going to buy that. Everybody that hates Trump's going to buy that. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit. I think I got time to do this. Let's see here. He did draft books. I want to talk a little bit about, I got this comment that he made. Now, he made a series of news comments. Hey, Brandon, how much time do I got as I keep moving forward? And I wanted to read what was said about a comment that he made with Clinton. So this was on June 28th, 2021. And this just puts the hammer in the nail of John Bolton's coffin, because these are comments he made to the media about the cavalier handling of intelligence information. Bolton's representative emailed the FBI again, or this wasn't a comment, this was a comment made regarding his leak, right? The FBI again reports that Bolton and his representatives had received the following email on July 25th, 2021, which representatives believed was associated with the Bolton account. So this is what they say about that leak. I do not think you would be interested in the FBI being aware. I do not think that you'd be being aware of the leaked content of John Bolton's email, some of which have been attached, especially after the recent acquittal. So they're saying because somebody was acquitted, I didn't think you'd be interested in this. This could be the biggest scandal since Hillary Clinton's emails were leaked, but this time it's on the GOP side. So they're saying, well, because John Bolton worked for a GOP administration, it's Republicans, and he's worked for Republicans before, but he's a Trump hater, right? They didn't think he'd be in it. But the most important thing, this was the biggest scandal since Hillary's email server. So John, you've heard him talk about it, and then he goes on and does this stuff himself. I think I got time. I'm going to have to skip through this, but I wanted to talk a little bit about just some of the stuff, if we got time, because there's pages and pages of this stuff. So I'll talk about some of the charges. Here you go. So September 23rd, 2018, he reveals a document, reveals intelligence about future attacks by adversary groups in another country. So what can you do with that? I'm Iran. I read this. I find out the intelligence. I try to figure out who knew it, how that leaked out, and I eliminate those sources, right? Let's see. On November 23rd, 2018, reveals a liaison partner sharing sensitive information with the U.S. and intelligence community. So now that liaison partner may have relationships with the people that were going to do the bad things. So they cut off that liaison, right? Or they eliminate the source that is talking to that liaison. This is why this stuff is dangerous, right? And of course, in addition to the sources being gone away, we don't have the information anymore because they've eliminated that potential leak. Here's January 13th, 2019, reveals intelligence that foreign adversaries were planning a missile launch in the future, a covert action in a foreign country. So there's a list of things that he did that were related to sensitive intergovernmental actions, sensitive sources and methods used to collect, including human intelligence. So again, it puts everybody at risk. That's just the third charge, and he's got a ton of them, right? Let's see, June 2nd, 2019, and this is a guy who was the head of our National Security Council, and he's a National Security Advisor. So this indictment of John Bolton, not only in my mind is the right thing to do, because we have to send a message to our most senior folks who are handling intelligence. Now, I don't think he needs to go to jail for 20 years, but he needs to be prosecuted for this because he, of all people, knew and understood just how sensitive this data was, knew and understood if it got out what it meant. I mean, just think about this. You're a source and you trust the United States and you give them information. And John Bolton types up a diary and sends it to his wife. Maybe let's say it's a Middle East thing, and his daughter. And Iran hacks into that and finds out the sources and methods of which the United States is getting information, and they lead it back and they trace it back to you and they eliminate you. Think about that. So John Bolton knew that he was compromised, that his AOL and Gmail were compromised. He duly informed the government of that, but did not tell them of the sensitive data that was leaked, putting all those people at risk, people who could have been secured, could have been safe, information passages that could have been protected, but he chose not to do that because he didn't want to get in trouble, because he didn't want to be prosecuted, because he wanted his book deal to go through. So John Bolton blew it. He needs to be prosecuted. This isn't a right thing. This isn't a left thing. This is just the right thing to do. And, and unfortunately, I told you about 14 years ago, I shared a speaking stage with John Bolton. He was the head speaker. I was just one of the also ran speakers. And, I was proud to be there. And come 14 years later, and I'm very disappointed in this man. So unfortunately, he does need to be prosecuted, and he doesn't need to be spending a lifetime in prison, but he does need to be sanctioned to send a message to all the other people in government that this is unacceptable behavior for the American people. So, hey, thank you for joining me again on Briefing with the Chief. I know I didn't have a guest today. I do have some stuff going on in my life, so it's harder to line up the guests because my whole house is a disaster, and I do produce from my house here. We are remodeling, and it's almost as stressful as divorce, I think, remodeling. It's one more thing after another, right? But thank you for joining me here today on Briefing with the Chief. Catch me next week. I hope to get somebody running for sheriff on the show, and I've reached out to Turning Chicago Red, maybe to try and get them on my show. But if not, maybe you'll just have me again next week. Thank you for joining me on Briefing with the Chief, and we'll see you next week. Amanda, you can take it away.